Hello everyone, Alastair here from Viking, and welcome to this week's In Conversation. And I have a real treat in store for you today. My guest is a photographer, but really she's a lot more than that. Her love of nature and her desire to capture and share its beauty has taken her to the four corners of the planet. And the images that she brings back have won her many awards and have been widely published. And she's also a TED Senior Fellow. To me, she's someone who will always seek the road less traveled, someone who is never afraid to walk through an open door, and someone who is truly a world person. She is Camille Seaman. Camille, welcome to In Conversation.
Good to be here.
I said there, Camille, that in my introduction that you were not someone who was afraid to walk through an open door. Can I say that? Would you go along with that?
Yes, I was definitely raised with that philosophy.
Yeah, I agree. I share it too. Camille, let me start by asking you just to paint a little picture for us. If I was in your house now and I went and looked out of the window, what would I see? Or what would I, not only what would I see, what would I feel?
Well, I'm on the far west coast of rural Ireland in County Clare. And I'm literally, if I looked out the window to my side over here, I'm looking at the Shannon River, and beyond is County Kerry. But immediately, they just yesterday brought the young calves into the field just below my field. Right. So I have these young cows there. And the feeling here today is, as we were saying earlier, it's soft, it's wet, but it's not hard rain. It's gray, it's moody, but still beautiful, very green.
But you, so it's a bit different from where you were before, which I think was California.
Yes, and that was part of why I left. Was I didn't realize how much I missed the rain, how much I missed weather and clouds. In California, I was in the Bay Area, Berkeley area, and every day, blue sky.
I couldn't agree.
Few clouds.
Yeah.
If there was clouds, it was fog that would burn off.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I love rain. I love, as Rick Burns said on this In Conversation program last week, that anything between your subject and your lens has got to be good, be it rain or fog or snow or hail or whatever. And how are you enjoying Ireland? Is it a little bit of a, do you feel at home there, or maybe you're like me, but I've spent most of my life living in another country, and I've kind of realized that I like being an outsider. I like being amongst the people, but not of the people. And I wonder if I think that's probably why I'm a photographer. I like being on the outside and looking in. Would you share that?
Well, this is my first time living outside of the United States.
All right.
And, that's another part of the reason why I decided if I'm going to do it, it's a good time to do it. I'm just 50 years old, and I think being on the outside as other is like my state of being. Even in the United States, I didn't feel necessarily very of the people that were there. Even in my family, I didn't necessarily feel.
Well, maybe that's a good point. That's good. That could lead us into you telling us a little bit about, well, more than a little bit about your family, because you have a Native American father and an African American mother. Is that correct? And,
correct.
And I guess with a sort of a cultural, with a mix of influences like that, you must have felt on the outside as a child.
Yes. Always growing up, I felt very included in my nativeness. My father's family is Shinnecock Montaukett, and they were very inclusive, and there was no question that we belonged. Whereas my mother's family, her mother was African American and her dad was Italian, and neither of those I felt connected to. And part of that was definitely because of exposure. I had much more exposure to my dad's family. So growing up on Long Island was mostly in the woods and having lots of lessons on what it meant to be a proper human being. That was really important to my family.
But if I've understood, your grandfather was a big influence on what the person.
Very much.
I guess, yeah. How was he with you? Did you spend most time with him as a child, or?
Well, what's interesting is he was an incredible support, and our tribe is matriarchal. That means that women hold the power, but it does not mean that the men are powerless. It just means the men, they understand that their role is to support, to be the strength and foundation to uplift the female of the tribe. And so he had many daughters. He had sons as well, but the daughters, he really, and I was his granddaughter, it was really important that he educate us to understand that we were born to lead, that we were born to stand apart, and that was very different from the message that I received going to school. Yeah. Just being in normal schools, that was, girls would not go out for sports. This was in the 70s.
Yeah. Seems incredible now. Yeah. Yeah. And then, because you left home very early, didn't you?
So I'll just finish with my grandfather and say,
sorry. Yeah, sorry. Please do.
No, because it ended up really shaping my perception of the world as a photographer, and that lesson from my grandfather was to understand that we were all interconnected and interrelated, that there was no such thing as separateness. And so one of the things he would do with me as a child from the age of about 5 up until he died, and he died when I was 13, but every day, whether it was raining, snowing, hot or cold, he would make us to sit outside, and I wasn't allowed to move more than the distance of my arms. And I'd sat there for an hour, and after an hour he would call me into the house and he would say, "What did you see?" And I would tell him what I saw. And what was great was if I said, "Oh, I saw this kind of cloud," or "I saw this bird building a nest," or "this butterfly," he would tell me what those things meant. And if I was stubborn and I said I didn't see anything, he'd say, "Go back outside." So I didn't realize this was a gift. I didn't know that I was being raised in this way that other children weren't. And not until he died. So he died when I was 13. And within 2 years, everything just fell apart in our family. Like, he really was a huge figure of holding us all together. And and so by that time, my mom had full custody of us. My parents were divorced, and it just disintegrated. So I left home for a number of reasons when I was 15. So I didn't even think about it, but I was literally homeless in New York City as a teenager.
I mean, were you a bit of a wild child at that time, Camille? Was it?
Yes and no. I think that I was naturally creative, and I wanted to explore my creativity, and a lot of that had to do with like the color of my hair, or the music that I listened to. I was into sort of punk music and things. My mom didn't have any understanding of what this was. She just thought I was a lost soul. And it was very hard to reassure her that I was safe, that I was not self-destructive, I was creative. And yeah, I think there was no way she could have known what I was.
Right. Was it around this time you got your first camera?
So yes, I'll back up a little and say that as a child, they would always give me, do you remember this Kodak 110 camera?
I do, and in a minute I'll tell you a little story about it. Yeah, I absolutely remember. Yeah.
So they would give me that camera and they would say, let Camille take the picture because she doesn't cut people's heads off. And so I, even as a that was 5, 6, 7, 8 years old with this little, and even then I knew those pictures were horrible. I was so disappointed with the grain and the quality.
Yeah.
But as a 15-year-old, when I left home, I was going to the High School of Music and the Arts in Manhattan.
Right. Wow.
For visual art.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And so they recognized that I was at risk because they knew I wasn't at home. And so they put me in an after-school program where they gave me a Nichromat film camera.
Oh,
and they took away the manual. They said, you have to figure out how to use it. And then they taught me how to bulk load black and white film and how to process it, develop it in darkroom. And they literally just said, go photograph your experience. And I had no idea how much that really saved me. It really did. But before I continue, I want to hear your 110 story.
Oh no, it's very quick. It's just in my family, my stepfather, being the stepfather, saw it as his role that he was the one who took the photos, because surely he was the only one who could understand something complicated like a camera. And we went on a holiday to Greece, and we came back and we sent the film off to be developed. When it came back, every photo was something pink and out of focus, and we could not work out what had happened. And we discovered that what he'd been doing was he had the camera around the wrong way, so he's taking a picture of his ear. Every picture was of his out of focus ear, and my mother was so happy because now after that she took the photos. But I do remember those cameras. God, they were extraordinary. Camille, so you have your camera, you had your Nichromat, you started taking some pictures, and then let's just jump forward to Tibet, when you were, well, you can tell us, you were mentored by someone who was a pretty famous photographer.
Yeah, so, from high school through college, I really didn't think of for my entire life, I didn't think of myself as a photographer. I thought that's something everybody did. I didn't think there was anything special or that I had anything special. But the series of events happened when I was 32 years old, so 2003. I just knew the switch came on, and I knew I wanted to document my life and my experience with a camera to show, and I did. I had intention. My intention was to show that there was something beautiful about this life and about this planet. And that's all I had. I wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna, be in magazines, or I didn't have any of those. I just knew I was gonna use a camera. And so I also knew that I had no desire to go back to university to learn how to become a photographer. So instead, I called up all of the photographers whose work I was like, how did they do that? And one of the first people I called was Steve McCurry, who, of course, is famous for the Afghan girl, the girl with the green eyes.
The great National Geographical photographer, Steve McCurry. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I called him and I said, I really love what he can do with natural available light. And would he share with me how to do this? And he said, sure. So he said, but you have to come with me to Tibet. And so I said, yes. I just, it's one of those doors. And I said, yes. So I went to Tibet with him, and I brought with me 5 different formats of camera. I brought with me my 4x5, you know, with the cloth over the head.
Oh,
I brought
really?
a
Wow.
Rolleiflex TLR. I brought a 6x4 Fuji.
Yeah.
I brought all these cameras, and he just shook his head and he was like, what are you doing? What are you doing dragging all this stuff? I had this huge Pelican case full of all these cameras. And he challenged me. He said, 1 body, 1 fixed lens, 1 ear. And that I took him up on that, and I did that. But more importantly, one day he caught me with my 4x5 out in the bright sun, taking pictures of some people. And he came out and he said, what are you doing in this horrible light? What are you doing? And he grabbed me and he pulled me into this alley, and he took the closest Tibetan woman and sat her down, and there in this alley he said, do you see how there are no harsh shadows, how the light is diffused, I call him my photographic father, because he took the time to very importantly remind me that the quality of light is imperative in an image if you want it to have a longevity.
Yeah.
And he said, and I agree with him, he said, it doesn't matter how good your composition is, how good your subject is, focus could be perfect, but if you don't understand quality of light, your images will not withstand the test of time.
Yeah.
And I took that with me.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It all starts with the light. I mean, that's the word photography is writing with light, and
Exactly.
And I think you learned from the best, Camille. That was quite something to be in Tibet with Steve McCurry. Yeah, that must have been great. So when you came back, you tell me if I got the timings on this right. I think when you came back, you went to you were going to get a flight in California to somewhere, and the plane was oversold, and you couldn't get on the plane. So yeah, let's talk about that, because you had a kind of moment of epiphany during that incident, didn't you?
Yeah, that was where the light switch came on. And I should say that up until that point, I thought that I was doing what I was supposed to be doing with my life, which was traditional beadwork. And I was very happy doing it. I was successful doing it. In fact, I was doing it 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, just to keep up with the demand of the orders that I had from galleries all across the United States. And by traditional beadwork, we can probably show pictures later of the moccasins and things that I would make. But because I was doing that so intensely, I woke up one morning and my hand felt like it was on fire. Just incredible pain. I went to the doctor and they said, you have Decravane's tendinitis and you have 3 options. You can use cortisone shots, you can rest it, or you can have surgery. And I said, well, let's try rest first and then go from there. So while I was resting my wrist, thinking that I was going to go back to beadwork, my boyfriend at the time, who became my daughter's father, he had a business trip to LA and we were in Oakland. And he said, just come. It's a short trip. So we were in Oakland Airport waiting for our flight when they announced that they had oversold the flight and they would offer a free round trip ticket to anyone who gave up their seat and waited just 1 hour for the next flight. And I was like, that's a no-brainer. I'll do it. So I gave up my seat. And in that moment, if anyone had told me that would change the trajectory of my life, I would not have believed them. But because, maybe people give up their seats, but how many people use that ticket?
Yeah.
And I used that ticket because it was Alaska Airlines. And before that moment, I'll be honest, I mean, I left New York partly to escape the New York winters. the idea of being cold, and I was never one of those children who dreamed about the North Pole or the South Pole or cold place. It just wasn't in my realm. And so here was this free ticket to Alaska. And so I decided to use this ticket to go specifically to a place called Kotzebue. And Kotzebue is situated on the supposed Bering Land Bridge that connected Siberia and Alaska. And I chose that place because I was curious about the idea that we had migrated from Siberia across this land or ice bridge into North America. And for my tribe is situated on the very eastern tip of Long Island. I mean, you can't get much further east. And I was curious about this idea that we had gone all the way there. What took us all the way there? And so I wanted to do a sort of reverse commute. I wanted to see what it felt like to walk across the frozen ocean back towards Russia. And I have to tell you, I had no real anticipation that I would reach Russia or anything like that. I just wanted the experience of walking across the ice. And I wanted to walk across the frozen ice to where the, in my mind, I thought it was solid ice and then water. And this was in the early days of the internet. And I did a little bit of research. I picked a month. I went up there at the end of February, beginning of March, when I knew the sun would be up, but the ice would still be there. And so I went up there, and when I landed, discovered that the airline, it turns out Alaska Airlines is notorious for losing baggage.
Oh, right.
And so I lost all my warm clothes, and I literally arrived with just a sweater on. And the local Inupiat people, they were so lovely and warm to me. They said, "Don't worry, sister, we got you." And so they outfitted me in a sealskin parka, hat, gloves, everything I needed, and said, "We'll bring you your clothes when they arrive." And so one morning I did. I just tucked my camera into my parka and walked out onto the frozen ice and started walking. And at first I thought, oh, this is totally safe, because every 10 minutes or so, someone on a snowmobile would come up and they'd say, "Are you okay?" It was like minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. It was pretty cold, and probably colder than that with the wind chill. But they would come up and I would say, "Yeah, I'm just going for a walk." And I was like, in my mind, I was thinking, this is totally safe. There's traffic. I'm fine. And I would walk. And then in the ice, there were small little twigs every 10 feet or so. And I was like, there's even a trail. This is totally safe. I'm okay. And so I kept walking and walking away from the town across the frozen ice. And after a while, I got to a point where there was no traffic. Nobody was stopping to say, "Are you okay?" And I walked for over an hour. And after an hour, 2 people pulled up, each on a snowmobile, a Russian woman and an Inupiat man. And they said, "Where are you going?" And I told them, I said, "I'm trying to get to where the ice ends and the sea begins." And they're like, "Well, that's 22 miles away." And I said, "Oh, I can't walk that," because I didn't have any supplies. I had no water, no food, no shelter. I literally just had what I was wearing on me and this camera. And I should mention it was a film camera. So they said, "Well, we're going that way, but we're not coming back." They were going ice fishing. "We can give you a ride." And I knew I would have to walk it back. So I said, "Well, I heard my grandfather say, when a door opens, walk through." So I walked through this door. I was like, I've never been on a snowmobile before. So I climb on the back with the man and off we go. And having never been on one before, I didn't know that they go as fast as they do.
They do.
And I could see, his little speedometer was like 60 miles an hour. And I started to do the math in my head, like 60 miles an hour times. Whoa, stop! I have to get off. And so they pulled over and they let me off. And it was one of the few times I took my camera out and made a picture. of them, and then I watched them as they just disappeared into the horizon, and I thought, wow, that's amazing. And then I turned around to look for the town, and it was gone. Like in every direction around me was just white, white. Like in some places you couldn't even tell the difference between the horizon and the snow, the ice. And I thought, uh-oh.
Yeah, problem.
Problem.
Yeah, big problem.
So I realized that I was in over my head and that I was going to have to walk this back. And so I decided to turn around that instant and start walking back, because it was windy and I didn't want the snow to blow away the tracks of the snowmobile. So I started to walk back, and it took me over 5 hours walking before I could see the town. But as I was walking, all of the teachings of my grandfather about the fact that I was standing on my rock in space, that I was made of the material of this planet, that I would return to the material of this planet, all that I am an earthling, was really powerful. And so it also turned out that I didn't know at the time, but I was 3 weeks pregnant with my daughter as I made this walk across the sea ice. And so my awakening as an earthling was also in tandem with my awakening as a mother. And I thought that was pretty amazing in retrospect. So I went home and I told my mother-in-law about this adventure that I had. And she, at the age of 70, was so intrigued by this idea that I had met my planet that she said she had to go see for herself. And so she signed on to a Russian nuclear-powered icebreaker and went to the geographic North Pole. And again, she was so moved by this experience of being in the Arctic at the geophysical North Pole that she said she had to write a book about it. Wow. And so when she came home from this trip and she said she had to write a book about it, I was like, that's great, good luck. And she said, no, we have to go. You have to be part of it because you were the inspiration. And we have to go to this place called Svalbard. And I'll be honest, I didn't even know where Svalbard was. I had to look that up. And by that time, my daughter was, by the time we were going to Svalbard, she was almost 3. But in between the time of me going to Alaska and her going to Svalbard, 9/11 happened. And when that happened, I was sitting on my couch in Berkeley, holding my child, thinking, what can I do? What can I do to show that there's something beautiful about this earth, beautiful about this life? And that's literally the moment when this switch came on. And I just knew that I would document my life. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to spend the rest of my life documenting climate change, or there was no grand plan. It was just literally, I will document my experiences. And so with this invitation to Svalbard and this switch on, I took all my formats of cameras. This was before Steve. So I went up to the Arctic with all of these cameras in tow. And I documented it, and something powerful happened. One of the pictures I made there, it was an old trapper's hut with a cliff in Svalbard, and that picture got published in New Yorker magazine. And it wasn't so much that it got published, but it was that someone wrote in a comment about that picture, and they said because of that picture, they had to go see that place for themselves. And I realized the power of a photograph, that I could literally get someone to get up and leave their home and go see for themselves. And I thought that was really amazing. So after Svalbard, in between was me calling up Steve McCurry and going to Tibet. And in Tibet, we were photographing people, and I really thought that's what I wanted to be, was a people photographer, a portrait, a cultural photographer. And I felt like I did. I left Tibet with him, and I had a good understanding of light and what I wanted to say in the world. When we went to Svalbard with my family, my mother-in-law paid for that trip. And we had such an amazing experience in Svalbard. My daughter was 3. She saw her first polar bears there. Wow. We went out, we were in a small icebreaker, and we went out into the ice. And there I realized how flawed my thinking was, that I could walk to the end of the ice, because there was a lot of pack ice, very broken up. And we sailed into that, and we got to the point where we couldn't go any further because it was solid pack ice. And we were so in love with it. We fell in love with the ice and that place, that we said, if this is what the Arctic is like, what's the Antarctic like? And so we decided then and there, as a thank you gift to her, to take her to Antarctica for Christmas. And so when I got to Antarctica, of course, I had this switch on, and I was thinking with my photographic mind, how am I going to document this place? But there were no people. And then I was like, oh no, because I really thought I was going to be a people photographer. Yeah. And so then again, my grandfather's teaching that everything is interconnected and everything is related. We have this idea in my tribe that everything is related. And it's funny because, of course, science now is showing us that we are related to plants. We are related to what we call the four-leggeds, the fish, the birds, the insects. They are all our relatives. And so we even say that the stones are the blood and bones of our ancestors. And so I decided in that moment, with my grandfather in mind, that I would photograph everything as if I was making a portrait of one of my ancestors. Wow. So whether it was an iceberg or a penguin or a hut or a rock. So I didn't think I was doing anything particularly special. It was just a way to problem solve. How do I approach this? Yeah. And I had seen many hundreds, if not thousands, of photos of icebergs before, yet something about having that intention of photographing my relation, my relative, literally the water of my ancestors, seemed to resonate. And I was very lucky because someone, without me knowing, slid my portfolio to editor at National Geographic and said, you have to see this woman. She's just doing it. And I did. I hadn't had an exhibition. I had nothing. I was just nothing. And here I was at that time, almost 36. And they gave me a Nat Geo award, which was. Go ahead.
Sorry, no, just no. I want you to continue, but just while you're talking, let's pull up. Paul, can we pull up the photo of Camille arriving and seeing the icebergs for the first time in the Antarctica? In fact, it's the photo that's also behind you behind you as we're looking at you now. And it would just be nice to see that, because I'd like to ask you. Yeah, I love this photo. It's a remarkable photo, and I really feel that. You must have just had your breath taken away by that, looking out at that. What can you try and just describe for people who haven't been to Antarctica, which is including myself, what it feels like to see icebergs like that for the first time?
Yeah, I say in one of my TED Talks, and I still feel it when I say it, that when I was on the deck of the ship before these amazing pieces of ice, your brain starts to short circuit, because you're thinking that's one snowflake on top of another snowflake for how many thousands of years until it's standing. It's traveled down the slope of a continent and then had a life as an ice shelf maybe, and then broke off into these incredible pieces of ice that have a second life as they drift around in the Antarctic currents and slowly disintegrate and return to their source.
I'm gonna stop you there. Let's show Paul. Can we show the clip of the of your iceberg? Some of your iceberg. I almost call them portraits because I think that's probably how you were approaching them. And then whilst that's showing, we can you can maybe just can you just say a little bit about how you found every iceberg to have its own individual characteristics?
They do. They have their own unique personality, and I'm not anthropomorphizing them. I'm not making them a human. I'm literally saying each one of them is created of very specific circumstances, and each one of them interacts and behaves in its environment quite differently. There are no two alike. Quite often people will, for example, the one that you're showing.
Yeah.
You're going too fast.
Sorry, my fault.
So this one right here, that one has like this elephant skin. And you will notice that very few of my photos, I learned from Steve, are with blue skies. Almost all of my icebergs, there are clouds, there's fog, there's overcast, because that's when they show this detail. That's when they show this color and this elephant skin. And, you know, sure, it's great to take pictures in sunshine, but I've seen icebergs like that. And I wanted to show them in a way that they hadn't necessarily been seen before. These two collided together. But this one was very special to me. It was stranded. It was literally stuck on the bottom of the floor of the sea because it was shallow there. And it literally was not going to go anywhere until it either broke apart or the tide lifted it and freed it. So they all have a unique way of behaving. These were creating their own clouds. It was amazing.
Wow, that's incredible. Were you photographing them all from the ice from a ship, or were you in a Zodiac or something?
So the majority of what you're seeing right now on the screen were made from the bow of the ship. There were a few handful that were made from the Zodiac, and even one or two that was made from the shore. Right. And what's important to know is I think that the most successful photographs are the ones where you forget that there was a photographer there. And it's just you there. It's you, the viewer, with the subject. And you almost forget that there was someone that had to stand there and press the button. And so I try and keep myself out of the images ego-wise. It's not about me saying, look what I saw. It's me saying, I want you to see what I saw. Right.
So over something like, I think 21 years, Camille, you've been traveling so often to the Arctic and the Antarctic. You've actually described yourself as bipolar, which and it's not over yet, because the good news for all of us is that you're going to be coming back and sailing with Viking as an expedition photographer on the new expedition ships in I think which will be coming on in 2022. So that's really exciting. That's great. So just maybe I mean, there will be people watching now who either booked on the expedition ships or be thinking about it. So just what would you say? I mean, just describe a bit what an expedition photographer is and does, because you know, that might be enlightening for all of us.
Well, that's a great question, and I think it's one that I wish more people understood, because I'm not a cruise photographer. I will not be taking pictures of anyone getting on or off the ship or at dinner. It's not that kind of thing. My job is to literally document our journey, our expedition, so that you don't necessarily have to. That's to alleviate the pressure. You don't, and I may not see everything that you see, but I will get a feel. I will literally capture a feeling in my photographs that will, if you don't want to do any work, there's a slideshow ready to go. You can take it back to your friends, press play, job done. But too many people, and it's a wonderful thing, they come because they do. And let's face it, I have a lecture that I give about photography on board. And I say the reality is everything has been photographed, and everything has been photographed well. So why do we all still continue to carry cameras? Why do we want to photograph for ourselves? And the reality is, for me, and I share this with our guests, is that photography is an incredibly powerful communication tool. And it's one of the great ways that we can express for ourselves an experience and a feeling. And so another huge part of my job, one that I really love, is helping people to express themselves better with their cameras on the ship. They literally can walk with me, and I'll say, this is how I approach this scene. This is how I photograph a penguin, or this is how I capture birds from the bow of the ship or on deck. And so I am there to either help elevate people in their personal photography, or to even get them fired up. Many people used to be interested in photography and put down their cameras. And now finally they have time or energy or desire to pick it up again. And I'm there to help put fuel in that furnace so that on our journey, they can make images that speak to their personal experience of these incredible places. So that's another aspect of the job.
So you're documenting the journey, and you're, but also there as in a sort of teaching, mentoring role. Well,
Absolutely.
Just take us through what are some of the challenges of I mean, I imagine it's very different photographing in sub-zero temperatures. From something that you're doing up in photographing in the States or in Europe. So what are some of the challenges that people would expect to confront on
well, the reality is a few things. One is if you want to make the images, you're going to have to be out there. And so for me, having the right equipment on my body, clothing wise, so that I can stay out for many hours if I need to.
James, Paul, let's pull up a still. There we go. Yeah, sorry, he beat me to it. Sorry, Camille. And I love the hat you're wearing in this picture. It's just tremendous.
Yeah, so that's a vintage World War II aviator sheepskin hat. And it is the best hat I have for working in cold places, because I know that my personal weak spots are my ears and my neck. And that hat helps keep the wind off my ears and my neck. You'll see there, I'm not doing an ad for any of these companies, but you'll see that I'm wearing an Arc'teryx, that's a Titan jacket. So it's waterproof and completely waterproof. It's never failed me. And it's also insulated, so it's very warm. You see, in fact, I have it's unzipped because it was so warm. I'm wearing these Bergens, they're bibs. They're actually like overalls, and they have knee pads, foam knee pads built into them. So when I kneel down on a rocky thing, or I don't have to worry too much about hurting my knees. Also, quite often in the Zodiacs, I find it much more comfortable to kneel down and lean over the pontoon to photograph than trying to photograph over someone's shoulder or battling that way. So having your knees be comfortable is very important. And then foot-wise, I'm sure if I'm not sure if Viking provides boots, but I'm sure they will.
I think they will. I think they will. Yeah.
But these are Arctic muck boots, and so these are insulated, waterproof boots that go all the way up to my knee. And the proper way to wear them is with the pants over the boots, so that I can literally walk through water, and the water won't come in to the boot at my knee.
Mhm.
And these are insulated and they're good to like minus 20 degrees.
Wow.
And so the reality in Antarctica with climate change is that it's not that cold. Of course, it can be very cold. You can really feel it with wind chill and potential katabatic winds. But more often than not, what you're dealing with is precipitation, whether that's wet snow or actual rain. And so that's where it gets tricky protecting your gear. I highly recommend a proper waterproof bag, and I'm not talking. We really try and keep the environment as clean as possible. So no plastic bags from the ship or home, but literally a dedicated waterproof bag.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And there's something I think I read about you somewhere. When it comes once you finish taking pictures, you use Photoshop, you use Lightroom. Do you? I think I saw somewhere that you said that if it takes more than a minute to edit, I don't bother with it. Which I
It's true. It's true.
Appeal to, actually.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I don't want to take away from anyone's personal joy. I know that some people, that's their joy, fiddling around on a computer with their image for an hour. It's just not my joy. My joy and point of pride is to say, this is what I wanted to record. And so I don't crop the frame, and I don't, if my horizon's crooked, I just don't have time to fix it. And
Okay.
it's constantly training my eye to be more and more precise, so that compositionally I am creating what I wanted. The only case where I'd say cropping is acceptable is, for example, if it's a polar bear and I only had a wide angle lens, and you know, you want it closer.
Yeah.
But even with my polar bear images, I will keep the frame as full as possible.
Okay. Let's show, Camille, let's show, we can show a clip now, and just bear in mind when you're watching this clip that it's taken with an iPhone, and we'll come back to that when it's over. So Camille, that beautiful sequence we just looked at was shot on an iPhone, and I think I wanted to show it because it's just very beautiful to look at, but also because I think it really demonstrates that you don't need a truckload of equipment in order to make beautiful images. Can you just say something? I mean, I'm all for encouraging people, if that's all you've got, use your iPhone, because you can do wonderful things. It doesn't, you don't need to have an expensive camera to take beautiful pictures. Although, mind you, iPhones are pretty expensive these days.
True. But so a few things. One is, I would say, I believe in one of my friends, he said, the best camera is the one you have with you.
Absolutely.
And so many more people, that's all they're using on ship. So they're just bringing their smartphones, and whether that's a Huawei or Sony or an Apple iPhone there, or Samsung even, all of them have incredible cameras on them. And I think the key, the video you saw there, take the time to look through the settings. I started out before there was such a thing as 4K using an iPhone 5, I think it was, for video.
Mm-hmm.
And I approached videoing with an iPhone with the philosophy of, I'm making a moving picture.
Right.
I'm not moving. I'm letting the thing have its own movement. So then again, it's really important to think about your composition and let the action happen through that. A lot of zooming and panning is not effective.
No.
And then the other thing is, know the strengths of your camera. And this goes beyond even your smartphone, but your camera in general, whether it's a DSLR or a mirrorless. Know the strengths of it and know its weaknesses, and lean towards the strengths and avoid its weaknesses. So for example, until the iPhone 11 and the Huawei Pro smartphones, the zoom on smartphones was horrible. If you tried to zoom in because the penguin was far away, the quality degrades quickly.
Yeah.
So don't do it. Only if you know it does beautiful landscapes, do more landscapes. If you have the new iPhone or the new Huawei, by all means, use those extra lenses. I think that they have 3 lenses on them now.
Right.
A wide angle, a normal, and a telephoto. And the quality is great on all 3. So use them to their strengths. But I would say, I always, no matter what gear it is, less is more. I actually don't bring a tripod for my still camera to Antarctica. Wow. And the only tripod that I do bring, I'm just gonna grab this. I don't know if you can see this.
Yep, I got it. That's a little baby.
This is a little baby that I can set up on a rock or in the snow. And I can put my iPhone on it, and I do a lot of hyperlapse or time lapses like that. But that's trudging through the snow. You have to remember, Antarctica doesn't have paved pathways. Right. It's very uneven, unstable, wet, slippery, frozen surfaces, and you don't want to risk hurting yourself, falling, trying to carry tripods. Occasionally, I will carry a monopod. Because there I can make it stable enough, but that's just for stills. So not a lot of gear. Okay. And then the camera that I've been taking for the last year, can you see this?
Yep, the Sony. Yep.
This is the RX10 Mark IV. And a lot of people come on board with super huge, tons of gear, telephoto, like I used to with a big case. I literally, that's all I'm bringing. And the reason I have switched to this camera is it has very good weather seals. That means I don't have to worry about it. If it gets a little wet, I just wipe it with a towel. I carry with me a super absorbent microfiber towel. And so I dry the camera and I put it back in the waterproof bag. The other thing that's great about this particular camera is it's got a zoom that goes from 24 millimeters, so quite wide, to 600 millimeter.
Whoa. Good heavens.
And it's sharp on both ends. And by that, I mean that it doesn't lose sharpness at 600 and it's sharp at 24.
Wow.
It is amazing. So it's great at catching birds in flight. It's great at landscapes. It's great at getting the detail of a penguin if you need to.
Wonderful. You want to go out and buy one. Yeah, great. Camille, I've got a question.
It's a little pricey, but it's not that much more if you consider that you have all the lens you need in it. You're not changing lenses. It's affordable.
Camille, I've got a question in from somebody called Jorn in Oslo, and he says, thank you so much for a great talk, Camille. Is there anywhere in the world you would love to go with your camera where you haven't been?
There's a long list. So for example, I'll be really honest here, and I'll say I don't do well in heat.
Okay.
I am not a hot weather person.
Right.
And because of this, I have not been, for example, to Central or South Africa. I have not seen the big animals that they have to offer there. I have not been to India or Cambodia or Vietnam, all of these very hot places where I would like to go, but I haven't been tempted enough to deal with the heat.
Okay.
I have been, and I did spend time in the jungle in Panama, and that's how I knew I don't do well in heat.
Have you been to Japan?
Oh, I love Japan. I would love to go back there.
Yeah.
I would love to go back to Tibet. I would love to. I spent time in Mongolia and Siberia. I would love to go back there.
Right. Right.
So, and there are lots of little places, tiny islands that I would love to visit in the South Pacific. But again, it's a bit hot.
Yeah, well, if you're not a hot weather person, yeah. But Camille, here's another question from this time from somebody called Shelton Sullivan in Silver Spring, Maryland. How has photography changed how you see yourself and other people and nature?
Well, how I see myself, I think as I became a professional, as in making my living as a photographer,
yeah,
I found that my intensity was hard to turn off, and it got to a point where it was interfering with my relationships. So, for example, we'd be on a family vacation in Australia, and I have my I cannot bring a camera on vacation. I cannot, because it will it go into that mode, and I'm no longer present with my family, and that's not fair to them. So that's one way. How do I see the world? I still am every day so amazed by the beauty, especially here in Ireland. It's the first time since I was a child that there is no light pollution here, because we're at the tip of Ireland and staring into the Atlantic. And when it's dark, it's super dark. So suddenly I'm starting to look at the night stars and the Milky Way and this comet that's visible. And I'm so tempted. We have gray skies, but I want it to be clear. Yeah.
Camille, let's move from ice to storms, which seems a logical way to go. Storm chasing. How did you get into that?
So all of my great ideas in some way or another are due to my daughter. It was even her idea that I moved to Ireland. But for storm chasing, she was at the time 8 years old, and she was sitting on our couch in Berkeley watching TV while I was vacuuming. And as I watched her on the couch watching National Geographic Storm Chasers, and I looked, because something about the light, the quality of the light in these clouds, I was like, what is that? But she could see I was like almost trying to look into the TV sideways, because I wanted them to turn the camera to this other area. It wasn't like they weren't showing what I wanted to see. And as an 8-year-old, she said, "Mom, you should do that." And I said, "Yeah, I should." And so her dad said, well, why don't you Google it? So during a commercial, I went and I Googled storm chasing, and then this whole world opened to me that, again, I didn't know existed before that moment, that you can literally pay a tour guide, a professional meteorologist, money to take you into these dangerous storms. And so I found this one site that was really super passionate. It had like lightning flashes across the screen and thunder noises. And I was like, I want to go with that guy. and so I looked, and this was 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, I looked and all of his trips were sold out. And I said, oh, it's so frustrating.
Yeah.
So I just decided to send an email saying, I'm really interested in doing this. Please let me know if anyone cancels. And less than a half an hour later, he emailed back and said, can you be here in 3 days? I just had one spot come open. So literally 3 days after my daughter said, Mom, you should do that, I was doing it.
So
and
you through the door. Huh?
Well, I had no idea what I was getting into. I mean,
well, come on, just so we know a little bit about what you were getting into, we have a clip to show. I think it's called Big Cloud, and let's look at that and then we'll talk about it a little more. Camille, that storm chasing looks incredibly dangerous and frightening. I mean, that's big weather. Did you ever feel you were in danger? I mean, can you predict whether, is it possible to predict where the storm will pass?
Well, okay, so you probably saw in the video that in the vehicle we have a laptop, and
Mhm.
it has a map on it. And this, we have live streaming data via
Mhm.
Wi-Fi to the vehicle, and it's real time. And so it shows us through special software Doppler radar imagery laid over a GPS map. So we can see exactly what is happening in real time and what direction, what wind speeds, if there's lightning, if there's hail, how big it is, if there's rotation, if there's a tornado on the ground. We see all of that. And so we can make some very hopefully educated guesses about which way to go and which way not to go. It can be frightening. It's funny, I wasn't I used to not be afraid of lightning until I'll say it as delicately as I can. We
Yeah.
spend up to 10 hours chasing. We're in this vehicle, and sometimes there is no place to stop and use the bathroom.
Right.
And I was desperate. You know, men can get out and go anywhere.
Yeah.
But I was really bursting. And all around me, we were in South Dakota, there's these cloud to ground lightning strikes, literally so powerful that it was setting the grass on fire.
Oh my
And
God.
the car would shake. That's how close they were.
Yeah.
And I was so afraid that I was going to die with my pants down, struck by lightning, chasing storms. But I am so thankful that that's not how I went. I'm still here.
Yeah, hell of a way to go. But,
It would.
we'd remember you. We'd remember you, Camille.
But the colors, you know, the colors and the light and the smells. It's such a visceral and tactile experience. I mean, you're literally watching this vortex energy that is the same energy as what created our planet, our solar system, our galaxy. And to see that in action is so humbling and so beautiful.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, the way you describe it is lovely. I have a question here which applies to this from Damon Stanwell Smith in Cambridge, who says, Camille, such an inspiring conversation about photographing nature's grandeur. Question, what natural phenomenon would you most like to photograph that you have not yet done so?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah,
I've been thinking a lot about tornadoes.
Okay.
Not tornadoes, volcanoes.
Volcanoes, yeah. Oh, yes.
I remember when Eyjafjallajökull in Iceland was erupting, and the beautiful images that were coming out from that. I would love to safely photograph volcanoes. I would also like to spend more time photographing waves. There's a man who does beautiful waves. Like they're just become these sculptural, dynamic things. And here in Ireland, being so close, we have very powerful waves here, and they're the most incredible teal and sometimes emerald color. I would love to photograph that, but I haven't quite figured out how I want to do it. But maybe, I do want to do it.
Maybe you just need to ask your daughter. You know, she'll Okay, another nice question here. Tony Hackenberg in the Villages, Florida. Tony says, will Viking Cruise Expedition offerings tell us if you are the onboard expedition cruise photographer so that we know which one to book to be sure we are on the ship with you? Well, there's a vote of confidence. And I think the answer to that is yes.
Yeah,
there'll only be one to start with, and you'll be on it. So, yeah, for sure. But yes, Tony, that's something that we can definitely find out for you. Yeah. One more quick question. Do you only, this is from Art Kramer in Tucson, Arizona. Do you shoot only in RAW format?
Yes. There's something, I teach this on ship, and I talk about people who should photograph in RAW and people who don't need to. And the reality is I want as much control over the image as possible, and I'm making as I really, you know, when you have a raw image, it literally is raw. That means it's like dough that needs to be cooked in order for you to get bread. And when you have a JPEG, all of that has been done for you, and it's literally getting the bread sliced in a package. And I remember very early in my wet darkroom photography days being frustrated when I would send a roll of film off to a 1-hour lab, and it would come back hyper-saturated, hyper-contrasty, not at all what I saw or wanted. And so that's the equivalent of a JPEG. It's all those choices are being made for you. Whereas if you are photographing in RAW, you have all the work, but I have all the control. So when I'm exposing for an image using RAW, my job is to literally collect. I feel like I'm trying to bundle up as much as I can in that file. And that's from the darks all the way to the highlights. I'm trying to collect as much information as I can so that I can very quickly, or less, go, and that's what I saw, instead of someone else's or some. Every camera manufacturer has an algorithm. Sony or Canon or Nikon, any of them, Fuji, Olympus, they all have their own algorithm, and it's their special recipe that says your image should look like XYZ. And I don't want their algorithm. I want it myself. So that's why I use RAW.
Yep, thank you. Beautifully explained. Thank you, Camille. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here, and one thing I do want to show before we separate is, because I thought it was just very beautiful, and those are you got involved with wolves, and you took some, I thought, very beautiful photographs of wolves. One of the reasons this caught my eye, Camille, was because once I was in the up near Tromsø in the north of Norway, and I went on I was taken out by a guide. There were just 6 of us in the middle of the night with, you know, in a snowy landscape. And the guide literally called in the wolves by making that howling wolf sound. And these wolves came in, and we were told how we had to behave, and which was basically not move and just stay very, very still. And it was just incredible. These wolves came right, and because they're very curious animals, and they came right up to our faces and even licked our faces. And I remember how clean they were and how good they smelled. I mean, they really did. They were really, really beautiful animals. Anyway, you spent some time photographing wolves, so let's talk about that. And Paul, while we're talking about wolves, can you show the wolf pictures at the same time? So Camille, how did you tell us, how did wolves come into your life?
So this is Akutak. This is one particular Arctic wolf that lives in California. And that already is like a strange story. I wanted to know more. And I am still, but I was still very curious about this idea that humans have about wildness. We want things to be wild. We're drawn to wild, but at the same time, we want it to be safe. And so many people in the United States have wolves as pets. And it's become a real problem because wolves don't reach sexual maturity until they're about 4 years old. And then a very different personality will come out. So Akutuk, which means ice cream in Yupik, she's an Arctic wolf that has been raised from a puppy. And it turns out that Arctic wolves are some of the more gentle, friendly wolves, as opposed to timber or gray wolves, who, when they get older, they can really be quite dangerous. And so what ends up happening is these wolves end up living their adult lives because they're not really good pets, and they're not wild enough to be let loose. So they're kept in these sort of sanctuaries for the rest of their life. And this particular image where she was running across in the woods,
that's my favorite.
In Marin County, and they can trust her enough to let her off lead but she has killed some of the neighbors' goats.
Boy.
But there was so I wanted to talk a little bit about photographing her. Like I could not wear earrings, I could not wear jewelry, because she would, even she was curious about my curls. She'd be like trying to get in my hair, and that incredible intelligence and hyper curiosity, and always, you can tell they're always analyzing and trying to figure out what's what. And it was the first time in my life where, when I first met her, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and some like part of my lizard brain knew this was not a dog. That's not a dog.
Yeah, no, there's a beautiful pictures. The one you mentioned, the one running, is probably my favorite of those. They're gorgeous. I have what have we got? Katie O'Brien from Parkland just says, absolutely beautiful. So it's a nice, very nice. Thank you, Katie. Tony Hackenberg, again in the Villages, Florida, says, do you have any published books and or DVDs of your photos? Which would you recommend? I think you do, Camille.
Yeah, I would recommend just Google my name, and you can watch my TED Talks. You can go find my books that are on Amazon. I have a book about at least 10 years worth of my time in Antarctica and the polar regions, called Melting Away. And I have one of my first book that was published was called The Last Iceberg. I think that's hard to find. And then there's the one about storm chasing called The Big Cloud.
The Last Iceberg is a beautiful book. I mean, they should reprint that one. I mean, I don't know whether that's possible or not, but it's a gorgeous book. I've seen it. It's absolutely lovely.
Thank you.
Just tell me quickly, because I don't know what is involved being a TED Senior Fellow. What does that actually mean? So
that was a life-changing. It's almost like the mafia. You never really get out once you're a TED Fellow. So a lot of people don't know what TED is. And TED stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. And for those of you who don't know about TED Talks, you can just go to TED.com, and literally there are thousands upon thousands of incredibly inspiring talks, from anywhere from 1 minute to 20 minutes long, about various topics. And so being a TED Senior Fellow meant that I was one of their people that they thought had an idea that was worth spreading, and they wanted to give me a platform upon which to spread that. So they mentor me. They have us come to TED conferences in places all over the world, where they introduce us to people like Elon Musk or Al Gore or Bill Gates. We're in the same room with a lot of visionaries and people who are trying to do good in the world or have interesting ideas, whether it's robotics or medicine, art, dance, music. And so like I said, you can go look at my TED Talks, and I've been fortunate enough to have 2 TED Talks that were published on their site. And I have several TEDx Talks, which are independently organized TED events. And in those, I'm able to share my work with the world. And because of those talks, I've been invited to speak around the world. I've been invited to exhibit around the world. And I'm actually supposed to be working on writing a story for a movie, because somebody through TED had asked me to become a filmmaker.
Wow, fantastic. Good luck with that. Camille, before we end, and unfortunately we do have to end, I just think I'd just like to hear you say something that you touched on earlier, because it kind of goes right to the heart of the kind of person I think you are, or at least the kind of photographer you are. And that's, just tell us a little bit about interconnectedness and your belief about the way that we as humans are not separate from nature.
Yes, so I talked a little bit about how my tribe sees all of us as relatives, and that this idea of isolation and separation is kind of where we've gone wrong, because from the moment that we think of ourselves as separate from nature, that's when we think we can, and we actually do harm to nature. And so one of the most beautiful things about interconnectedness is I like to think of it as we are all of this earth. We are all earthlings, and we belong to this place. This and one of the experiences of being at whether it's the Arctic or the Antarctic, sometimes for some people it's a mountaintop, others it's a desert or a lake. You feel this incredible smallness, but you also start to understand that you are connected to it in some way. And as a photographer, one of the things I teach people on ship is it drives me crazy how many people will step off of the Zodiac onto the shore, and the camera goes to their face, and the whole time on the shore is through this device.
Yeah.
And I try to teach people to be still, and this is what my grandfather taught me: be still and allow that barrier between you and nature to dissolve. That sense of isolation, let it dissolve. And when you are still in nature, that barrier erodes, and then suddenly animals will come closer to you. Strange things will happen, and it's only happening because you are present, you are there. You are not on some device with your thumbs or through a lens. And that's when you can feel something. And that feeling is, whether you have a vocabulary for it or not, a reminder that you are home, that you are interconnected, and that you are interrelated with everyone and everything.
I think that's just beautiful. That's a lovely way to end our talk, Camille. I think we all feel a little connected with things that you've been saying tonight. Thank you so much. I look forward, I hope, to sailing with you sometime on a ship going to somewhere cold and snowy and very beautiful. Thank you so much, Camille. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alastair. Yes.
And I'm going to just talk for a little bit about a photo challenge that I'm going to set you photographers watching. I'm going to I decided to choose a theme, and the theme I've chosen is looking out, looking in. And you can take it literally and photograph the view from your window, or the reverse, from the outside looking back in, or maybe try and do something in a way that tells a story, that conveys an emotion, particularly in these strange times we're living through right now. The address, I think, send any photos that you might take for this is below. Just here, Viking.TV@Viking.com. Looking out, looking in. It's a broad theme, and there's many ways to interpret it. We would love to see some of your photos, and we'll try and find a place, a little home for them here on this TV platform. So just remains me to thank Camille once again. It's been a real pleasure talking to her. I can't believe time has flown by so quickly. And thank you, all of you, for watching. And from me, Alastair, I hope to see you next week for another In Conversation. Thank you and goodbye.